Marisha here, and Trump has been in the news recently for attacks that he made on London and its mayor, Sadiq Khan. So, as an American living in London, here's my 2 cents on the matter. So, for those of you who are not familiar with what I'm talking about, Trump attacked Khan during an address to the UN, which was supposed to be 15 minutes, but was an hour of rambling, mostly about kind of anti immigrant rhetoric, which of course appeals to his fan base, both in the US and abroad, with people like Nigel Farage. And he said, by way of example of how this unchecked migration is ruining everybody, he said that, like, London, with its terrible, terrible, terrible mayor, I think he said terrible 3 times because we know obviously the man has a limited vocabulary, so that's the best he can do. Um, is so changed. And then he said that Khan wants to institute Sharia law. So within that context, obviously we know that by so change, that's not a good change. He is sort of implying that London is more dangerous, that it's less pleasant, maybe grubbier, dirtier, a shell of its former self. Um, so I'll talk about the safety issue first, and then I'll talk about really the like Islamophobia behind what he said. So in terms of safety in London, as a single woman, I am more vulnerable anywhere that I go in the world compared to someone like Trump. And as a single woman, I feel perfectly safe walking around the streets of London, including at night. Obviously, there are places that I wouldn't go by myself, particularly at night. But for the most part, I just wander the streets without a care in the world. At, 1 in the morning, I can walk down Tottenham Court Road or Euston Road and I feel fine. And to put it in some perspective for me, again, personally, the last place that I lived in the US before I moved here was Alexandria, Virginia. And that is part of the metropolitan DC area. So it's not Washington, DC proper, but again, to put it in perspective, where I lived in Alexandria, I was 7 miles away from the Capitol building. I could drive to the Capitol in 10 minutes. And I was there in my apartment watching TV when I saw the insurrection on January 6th. And we were put under curfew that night, right? Our mayor put us under curfew because we were close enough that he thought that some of that violence could spill over. So, Alexandria, Virginia, though, in general, I would say tends to have a reputation of being a little bit like posher, a little bit more bougie than DC. And it's probably not, it's not the richest part of Northern Virginia, but it's it's pretty well off. There's a lot of people there with privilege. I wasn't one of them, but there are plenty of people there who were. And even where I was living, which was like a super budget apartment complex, I felt safe. I felt really safe in Alexandria, Virginia. Again, I went running sometimes in the morning before while it was still dark out and didn't feel any danger doing that. So to compare crime rates, though, Alexandria, Virginia to London, I just thought, okay, well, let's see what the homicide rate is in each of those places. And I had to do a little bit of math because the stats that I got for Virginia were numbers out of 100,000, and the stats for London were out of 1 million because London is significantly bigger than Alexandria, Virginia. So then taking the stats for Alexandria and turning it into how it would be out of 1 million people. The homicide rate in London for per 1 million people is 11.6, and the homicide rate for Alexandria per 1 million people is 50. So almost 5 times worse in Alexandria, Virginia than in London. And again, we're talking about, I felt safe in both of those places. And London, statistically speaking, is almost 5 times safer in terms of homicide rates. Now, obviously, there's lots of different crimes. And yes, London does have a problem with knife crime and even more so phone theft. But, you know, I would much rather live in a city where, to take precautions, I'm worried about, okay, don't have your phone out while you're walking down the street, especially close to the curb where someone with a bike can come by and swipe it, versus the States where it's like, does this person have a gun? Right. So London, super, super safe. And obviously, if you watch this channel, you know that I think beyond its safety, it has a lot of great things to offer. So many free and affordable things, as well as obviously some great things if you're willing to fork out some money for it. Tons of theaters, tons of beautiful parks, tons of museums, different cultural festivals. Again, I could talk about this ad nauseum, and I do. So lots of great restaurants, some of the best universities in the world. So this idea that it's so changed, right? Like that it's dangerous or it's worse than it was, is ridiculous. And moving into the sort of Islamophobic element of Sadiq Khan wants to put in Sharia law. Sadiq Khan marched in pride parades, like to paint him as like just because he's Muslim that he is Islamist is ridiculous. Um, and I just I also personally um need to speak out against Islamophobia as someone who lived with a Muslim family for 2 years, and they were some of the kindest people that I have known. Um, so I think one of the things that I am most proud of in my life is when I served my country as a Peace Corps volunteer in Turkmenistan. And as part of that service, it meant that I lived with a local family for 2 years. And my host mom was an amazing woman. She was a working woman. And my host sister, I consider to be my sister. And my host cousin, I consider to be my cousin. And she is a good friend. And when I lived there, um, it was difficult to practice my faith in terms of, it is a 98% Muslim country. There aren't churches around. Um, they just so no, I couldn't just walk into a church like I could in a Western country and find a lot of other Christians to fellowship with. But I certainly was able to practice my faith at my home and be open about it. Like my family knew that I was a Christian. I read my Bible on Sundays and listened to sermons online in my room as my that was my Sunday worship. And I went to the local Russian Orthodox church on Easter. Um, I obviously didn't understand what they were saying because it was all in Russian and we were taught Turkmen in our training. But I had a fellow volunteer who had lived in Russia, and he told me kind of what to expect and what I would see and what that represented. And so I had an idea of what was going on, even if I didn't know exactly what was being said. And we walked around the church and they were saying in Russian, like the priest was saying, "He is risen." And they were responding, "He is risen indeed." I walked with them and I just responded, "He is risen indeed," in English while everyone else around me was speaking Russian. And so I found ways to practice my faith. And I did not feel like I couldn't do that. In fact, quite the opposite. um Whenever we would eat together, um at the kliyonka, which is basically, it's like a basically like a picnic cloth blanket, because they don't have tables, so they sit on the floor. And we didn't eat together very often because usually I just made my own meals. And my host mom, like, she did work, and so we didn't always have the same schedule and stuff. But there would be occasions where we would all eat together, especially if we had extended family coming in. And so I don't know if this is true across all like Muslim cultures, but at least in Turkmen culture, the Muslim prayer before eating, they would cup their hands and say some prayer and then make this motion. And so whenever they would do that, I would just sit quietly with my head bowed, and just sit respectfully and let them do their prayer, and then we would eat together. And the first time that we were all kind of together, my sister, who was like 5 when I moved in, she was so cute. She was trying to tell me like, oh, you need to like you have to pray or whatever, and her mom just like stopped her and gently explained like, no, she's a Christian, she's not Muslim, so she doesn't do the prayer with us. And that was it. And it was very much this ability of like, we have different faiths and we are going to practice our faiths. And um that doesn't mean that like we can't live together and we can't eat together and coexist with each other. And I think that the vast majority of Christians and the vast majority of Muslims, that is how they are, right? Like, I have also taught plenty of Muslim students when I was in Virginia. I have Muslim students here in the UK, and they are just like my, you know, white Christian students in terms of they all have families where they may have siblings that they really care about that they have to look after. They may have family issues that they're dealing with. They all have hopes and dreams. They all have like those teenage anxieties about getting pimples, and all have interests in like playing video games or watching different shows on TV or fashion or makeup, and like they're just all normal teenagers. And this idea of saying that the far right extremist Islamists are representative of Islam as a whole or of Muslims as a whole is absolutely false. And it would be the same as saying that the far right white Christian nationalists are representative of Christians as a whole. And I think that's a big part of why not only do I have firsthand experience of like living in a Muslim country and living with a Muslim family and having Muslim friends and knowing like, hey, with the exception of, right, our religious beliefs, we're pretty much the same. But also as a Christian who is very devout in my faith and cares very much about following the teachings of Jesus, and has watched over the past few decades as in America, and it happens in the UK as well, watching this far right contingent sort of hijack my faith and claim that like that's what Christianity is when it's not. Um, I think that Muslims and Christians have a lot in common in terms of most of us are just trying to live our lives and be good people and follow our faith, um, with authenticity and in humility. But we both have these sort of far radical right contingents that are sort of ruining it for everyone else. And the fact that Trump is like tapping into that and fear mongering is absolutely abhorrent. And I guess I had this thought as I was thinking about what I was going to say for this video. I went for a run in Regent's Park this morning, and I had this thought about Trump and his trying to take down London and say that it's like this terrible place. I can go to Regent's Park every day if I want. And one of my favorite things is when the rose garden is in bloom. And those roses last for a long time, actually. I'm always surprised that like there's still roses hanging on, and there will still be some roses, I think, maybe even into November, if I remember from last year. I love when I go for a run in Regent's Park to literally stop and smell the roses. And as I was doing that today and I was thinking about this video, I just thought, yeah, I can stop and smell the roses here. Meanwhile, Trump paved over the Rose Garden at the White House. And if that's not an incredibly apt metaphor, I don't know what is. Like, subscribe, tell your friends how gnarly this channel is, and I'll see you next time.